These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
His watercolours, described as miraculous. People can't believe the effects that he manages to achieve.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? I'm in London's National Gallery, just after the doors have closed for the evening, which is lucky for me, because if they were open, I could not be standing here, because of the 5 million people who come through these rooms every year. So many are attracted to just one image, like bears to honey or bees to nectar. What is the image, you ask yourself? But already you know the answer. This is The Sunflowers by Vincent Van Gogh, the patron saint of loneliness. It's a deceptively simple image, just 15 sunflowers in a modest pot. And yet, this picture is a phenomenon. It quite literally dazzles anyone who comes into its orbit. This is one of the brightest pictures you will ever see. You walk into this room, which is full of fantastic paintings by very famous painters, and this punches you hard in the eye, so hard you can almost fall over. But here is the paradox. Behind the brightness, it is also a surprisingly dark picture. For an artist who produced almost 2,000 drawings and paintings, it's often said that this picture is the one that Van Gogh was most proud of. It's a deeply personal painting that captures a definitive moment in his life. Van Gogh did not paint this to hang in the National Gallery or any other gallery, frankly. He painted it for a much more personal and intimate reason. He painted it to hang in the bedroom of a friend for whose company he was desperate and who he had invited down to his house to stay. It was, if you like, a kind of lure. And although it may appear to be a joyous picture, the story behind it is, frankly, harrowing. It's a story which begins with the artist as a boy, in a life tarnished by tragedy right from the start. A year to the day before Van Gogh was born in 1853, his parents had another son who died a few hours after birth, also called Vincent.
From an early age, he was quite intense. In the churchyard outside the room where he was born and where he first grew up, there was a tombstone with his own name and date of birth 1 year earlier, so it must have affected him.
Brought up in Brabant, southern Holland, Van Gogh was the eldest of 6, but he was also always a loner.
Van Gogh, I think, was a really interesting, extraordinary, possibly quite frustrating young man. He was baffling. And he was somebody who would become instantly enamoured of something and possibly just as quickly give it up again.
He was a missionary.
A bookshop assistant.
He was a preacher.
He wanted to be a priest at one point.
His family actually offered to pay for him to go to theological college. He's like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore.
An apprentice art dealer.
Some say he was a baker.
He's also a bookseller.
This is my favourite, an unpaid assistant prep school master in Ramsgate. His family showed signs of absolute desperation in trying to think of what Vincent could do.
But there was one member of his family who saw talent in Van Gogh from the start. His younger brother and closest friend, Theo.
Theo suggested to him, why don't you try your hand at being an artist? Because, you know, you're quite good.
He never had any formal art training. He taught himself, and he enjoyed it.
It was a career he was able to pursue only because Theo, by then an art dealer in Paris, offered to support him.
Van Gogh's relationship with his brother is complicated, like all his relationships, but nevertheless it's the most enduring relationship. Theo is his anchor, and without Theo's support, financial, moral, emotional, Van Gogh may never have developed as an artist.
His early paintings are a world away from the sunflowers. He painted what he saw around him, miners and struggling peasants, the subject of an ambitious early work which is almost a caricature of the Dutch tradition of peasant portraits, the potato eaters.
It's a work which is about a peasant family gathered around this rather meagre meal, and it's a symphony of browns and beiges, no bright colour at all.
It also shows his identifying with the people who he's painting. It seems to contain anguish within it. You see these people who are pinched by poverty. There's really not enough to eat, and Van Gogh gets this across in his work in a quite extraordinarily empathetic way.
He painted the peasants with haggard features and desperate expressions. He was quietly pleased with the finished canvas. Perhaps this would be the piece to launch him as an artist. But it didn't sell. Not only was it bleak, his critics complained, but the figures were badly realized. It was at this point that Van Gogh made a crucial decision. He would leave the Low Countries. He decided to go to France, or rather, to its beating cultural heart, Paris. Good call. Paris would help him unlock a new creative style, a fresh vision. What Vincent would find in Paris would change his entire approach to painting. Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers is one of the most famous paintings in the world. Created in 1888, it still dazzles us more than 130 years later. This is such a familiar image, it's quite hard to remember just how strange and radical this painting is. First thing to say, every painter is told you need lots of contrasts of colour, different colours rubbing up against each other. And what has Van Gogh done? It's basically all yellow. Primrose yellow, orangey yellow, a kind of creamy yellow, a greeny yellow. Yellow, 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 and yellow. He has more or less used up all his yellow on this one image. The reasoning behind this reckless use of colour originated in the next chapter of Van Gogh's life. Paris.
If you were interested in painting, that was the place you had to go. There was an awful lot of exciting avant-garde ferment and controversial cutting-edge stuff being done in Paris.
Paris at the time was so different to what he was used to. There was colour, there were bars, there were brothels. He fell in love with the museums, with the art, with the fact that all the artists were there as one big family, and he wanted to be part of that family.
He soon became friends with radical artists like Toulouse-Lautrec. They were as inspired as he was by the Impressionists.
The great revelation of Paris for Van Gogh was colour.
When he saw the Impressionists, he was so flabbergasted by the colours they were using and their small, light brush marks.
Impressionism and its fizz of colour was so exciting to him.
The Impressionist techniques changed everything. This was how Van Gogh was meant to paint. All he needed now was a subject that spoke to and of him. Common, prickly, standing alone. And it was when he stumbled on an allotment during one of his frequent walks that he finally found it, the image that would come to define him. Here, Van Gogh made a painting of one lonely sunflower. Now, nothing against sunflowers, but they're not exactly the most sophisticated, beautiful, interesting flowers. They're not beautiful roses. They're not like those gorgeous, multicoloured tulips the Dutch enjoyed painting so much. They're not even hollyhocks. They are fairly basic flowers. They're tough, but really quite earthy blooms, and something about their character clearly spoke to Van Gogh.
He is, in a sense, an outsider in the art world. He's a maverick. He doesn't fit in well. And the sunflower has that kind of rebellious quality that I think he identifies with.
For whatever reason, his paintings were transformed. The dark, dull tones of his first canvases disappeared for good. Instead, he embraced his palette, reaching for brighter shades, adding emphatic dashes of yellow. He worked more urgently, using stronger, swifter strokes. Even the dying two-cut sunflowers feel full of vigour. Eventually, they caught the eye of a man who was to play a huge role in his life from this moment on, the one who would inspire his most famous work. His name was Paul Gauguin, an older and more established artist who'd seen some of Van Gogh's work hanging on a local cafe wall. He asked for two of the sunflower paintings.
And in return, Paul Gauguin gave Vincent one of his paintings. So there's an early kind of mark of friendship in this exchange of paintings.
His friends may have admired his work, but Van Gogh was struggling to find a wider audience. His paintings just weren't selling.
You know, he's living a very precarious life. It's very isolated. He has no real profile in the art world of Paris.
Worse still, he wasn't getting on with his brother Theo.
From the evidence we have, it seems that virtually nobody could stand living with Vincent van Gogh or indeed spending extended periods in his company. You just couldn't stop him talking.
He was incredibly intense. They were living in a very small flat, which was quite claustrophobic for the two of them. Theo was going to his job every day and Vincent was staying at home painting, making an awful lot of mess.
Theo reports that after a hard day at work as an art dealer, he'd come home, have supper, Vincent would start talking to him. Theo would say he was tired and thought he'd go to bed. Would go to bed and Vincent would follow him into the bedroom, pull up a chair and carry on talking to him. He was very difficult company.
Just 2 years after he'd arrived in Paris, Van Gogh was now desperate to leave.
He was suffering, as he often did, from depression, low spirits, heavy drinking. He didn't like the cold and dark of the Parisian winter. He wanted to experience the bright light and colour of the South. And all these motivations prompted him, possibly quite on the spur of the moment, to climb on the express train to Provence.
Vincent van Gogh arrived in Arles, in the southeast of France, towards the end of February 1888. For local expert Philippe Gonninet, there was an immediate connection between the artist and this quiet, ancient town.
Van Gogh came to the south of France, looking for the color, for the light. Actually, he took the train to Marseille and just stopped in Arles for a short period of time, really fell in love with the city, hence the reason why he stayed.
He suddenly felt this desire to paint, and not just one or two pictures, but to keep painting. He wanted to paint the sunshine.
The next 15 months were astonishingly productive. Van Gogh's style began to transform once again, developing the bold expressiveness that would play such an important part in the sunflowers. He filled his canvases with blossoming trees and local workers. Fishing boats he saw on a day trip to the coast. Many of the scenes he painted look just the same today.
So I'm now standing in front of Terrasse de Café la Nuit, one of the central bars in Arles that was painted by Van Gogh. And he would love to come in the evening. He had his wooden hat with little candles stuck on it in order to have a little light in order to do the painting and see the painting he was doing. He's one of the first painters to paint outside in the evening.
But this wasn't the only reason he stood out in Arles.
The local used to call him le fou roux, the mad ginger guy. And they didn't really like him because A, he was an artist, B, he was drinking a lot of absinthe at the time. He was sleeping with prostitutes. Plus people that had seen him painting were a bit worried about him because he was painting like frantic, manic, and very, very quick and talking to himself.
People found him strange, and a lot of Van Gogh's life was spent being incredibly lonely. He was a person that people didn't really understand. If they did understand him, they often didn't like him or were scared of him. And this led to a great feeling of isolation.
So now I'm taking you to the Rue du Bout du Monde, the end of the world street. That was the former name where the brothel Van Gogh used to go is located. One of those tiny houses where we'd be coming to look for comfort and someone to talk to.
Just 3 months after he arrived in Arles, Van Gogh confessed to Theo in a letter, "You know, I've always thought it ridiculous for painters to live alone. You always lose when you're isolated." And he knew he had to do something to make his life happier.
He conceived the idea that it would be very good to get other friends and associates from Paris to come and settle there, to set up an artist's colony.
It would be a wonderful community of artists where they'd all live happily and they'd sell their work together. Be a collective.
Van Gogh looked around for a suitable location, and in the scruffier part of town between the railway station and the brothels, he found it, the Yellow House.
He was really happy and wrote very enthusiastically to two of his sisters and his brother about how he was going to start this arts community. And he was looking forward to the future.
The first person he invited was Paul Gauguin, the artist he'd met in Paris, to whom he'd given his 2 early sunflower paintings.
Gauguin didn't want to go. Gauguin came from a very different background. Before he was a painter, he was a stockbroker. He was used to living a very different type of life. But what encouraged him was Van Gogh's brother, Theo, who at the time sold Gauguin's paintings. And he said to Gauguin, "I will pay you to go and stay with my brother."
So that July, Gauguin finally agreed to come to Arles. Full of anticipation, Van Gogh wanted to make a dramatic gesture. He decided to decorate Gauguin's bedroom, and he turned to the one subject that had brought them together in the first place: sunflowers. Van Gogh had dreamed of a set of 12 sunflower pictures. This is one of 4 that he made in an extraordinary, intense burst of energy over just a few days. Each canvas is slightly different. The first is a simple composition. 3 huge blooms pop against a bright, bold background. Then he experiments with much more vivid shades. The sunflowers are rougher and more abstract, his loose strokes accentuating their spiky petals. By the third painting, the composition had a calmer confidence. 14 sunflowers in every stage of life, complemented by gentler, more even tones. He thought it would be his best, until he started on the 4th.
He's depicting 15 sunflowers, with a very radical yellow on yellow colour scheme that he describes as light on light.
Nobody had ever done anything quite that wild. Essentially, all yellow, yellow on yellow, different kinds of yellow. A monochrome picture.
Some of them just have the spikes left, so they're sort of at the end of their day, passing away.
There's not this kind of dishonesty of showing flowers in a sort of permanent state of bloom and of youthfulness. And that, again, is very characteristic of Van Gogh. He's looking at the natural world with this very kind of receptive eye. He's looking at all the detail, but also this kind of passage of time.
When Van Gogh was painting sunflowers, he was at his happiest. And he was happy because he thought his life was going to change now. Gauguin was coming. All his past demons would disappear through Gauguin. They would paint together, they would live together. This was Van Gogh, who was used to solitude. He thought it was going to be a whole new beginning for him. And of course, it wasn't to be.
Van Gogh poured all of himself into these paintings. Like all his great paintings, I believe that these are fundamentally lively, passionate, colourful pictures about human loneliness. In the midst of movement and colour and life and beauty, we are, in the end, by ourselves. These are the final testament of a lonely man, which is perhaps why we respond to them so strongly. Only 4 months after he finished them, he had a full mental breakdown, and 2 years later, he was dead. In the summer of 1888, Van Gogh painted a series of sunflowers, culminating in these 15 magnificent blooms. Even now, more than 100 years on, his flowers seem as vivid as the day he painted them. So what techniques did Van Gogh use on his canvas to capture the spirit of the subject he loved so much? Classically in painting, you're taught to make the brushwork vanish. You can't see it. It's so smooth that you have the illusion that you're looking at a real flower or a real pot or whatever it might be. Here, Van Gogh has done exactly the opposite. You can see every single flicker and mark that his thumb and forefinger and the brush have made. He uses impasto, great big gobs of paint slammed onto the canvas. You can see he's taken a brush and filled it up with really thick paint and then kind of stabbed it into the canvas and then he's pulled the brush straight out again. So it's almost three-dimensional. The strokes of the petals and the leaves are again great wodges of paint. It's not a picture of a dead sunflower. It's pretty close to being the thing itself. And the sunflowers aren't the only place where you can see Van Gogh's ingenuity on this canvas. If you look at the back of the painting, the wall, it's a kind of buttery slab of paint. You can actually see not just the thickness of the brushes he was using, you can actually see the individual bristles of the brush still captured in reverse on the oil paint. He's saying, remember that I, Van Gogh, made this with my hands. Think about my thick fingers, think about my brushes, think about the oil and the goo and the slap and the sweat that went into this. All of that is still bleeding and dripping off the canvas all these years afterwards. For the very first time as he painted his sunflowers, Van Gogh was full of hope for his community at the Yellow House, for his friendship with Paul Gauguin, and for his own future as an artist. All of this he funneled directly into the radiant blooms. It took Van Gogh just a week to complete the 4 sunflower paintings, and when he had, he put the last 2, the 2 that he liked best, onto the walls of Gauguin's bedroom. And they must have blazed from the walls of the bedroom of this tiny French townhouse. A shout, a scream almost, for companionship.
The effect of Gauguin's bedroom must have been quite extraordinarily overwhelming. He must have got quite a shock when he arrived.
He was bowled over. He loved them. Of all the things that Van Gogh did, Gauguin loved the sunflowers the most.
Quickly, the two men settled into an intense partnership.
To start off with, they set out working together, and it actually goes surprisingly well. Van Gogh settles down. They start producing quite a lot of good work.
Van Gogh was very quick, very immediate, painting a picture a day, attacking the canvas almost as if he's dancing with it. Gauguin, on the other hand, was much more methodical, much slower, much more considered. Van Gogh liked to paint from life. Gauguin liked to paint from his imagination and from his memory.
In November 1888, Van Gogh painted portraits of the two men's chairs, wittily capturing their different natures.
The two chairs are a symbol of his and Gauguin's friendship, and they seem, just through these simple chairs, to encapsulate the two very different personalities of the artist.
Vincent's chair shows his simplicity. He didn't need much to be happy in life, whereas Gauguin was a bit more worldly. Gauguin would be reading modern novels and keeping up to date with what was fashionable.
When you look at them, you feel as if they've perhaps only just been vacated. They're a wonderful symbol of this community that Van Gogh had so wanted to build.
But as days turned to weeks, this dream became less and less a reality, and with only each other for company, the two men's differences became more and more pronounced.
Gauguin found living with Van Gogh very, very difficult. The two artists were very, very different people.
Gauguin hated living in Arles. He said it was the filthiest hole in the south. He really disliked it. And they were beginning to get on each other's nerves.
Then the weather deteriorates. Wind starts blowing, it starts getting cold and rainy. They have to work indoors, which means they're working in one small room. Van Gogh is probably talking quite a lot of the time, and pacing up and down was another of his habits when working. Gauguin is trying to concentrate, and after a while, things get more and more tense.
They would argue about art. They would argue about cooking, the best way to cook tomatoes, even. They argued about everything. Van Gogh scared Gauguin. It's been said that Gauguin recalled how he would be asleep in his bed and he'd wake up and Van Gogh would be standing over him, staring at him while he was in bed asleep.
It didn't take long for everything to come to a head.
Something on December the 23rd pushed him over the edge. What Gauguin said afterwards is he was just so bizarre I couldn't stand it anymore.
Gauguin said, that's it, I've had enough, I'm leaving, I'm going back to Paris and I'm going, I won't be coming back.
Van Gogh has such a volatile temper. It just escalated, it went crazy. Gauguin ran out into the street and Van Gogh followed him with his razor.
The two men continued to scream at each other until Gauguin took refuge in a hotel. Van Gogh stormed back to the Yellow House and, still holding his razor, sliced off a chunk of an ear.
He wrapped up his ear in newspaper, put a beret on to disguise his wound, and took it off to the brothel, where he left it at the door for a certain employee who went under the name of Arles, went back to his house, got into bed and passed out.
Really, it was self-harm. He was desperate. All his hopes and his dreams and his future with Gauguin had disappeared. They'd evaporated over this row, and he felt as though he had no future.
By the time the police arrived the next morning, it said the walls of the Yellow House were stained with blood. Van Gogh was rushed to hospital, the doctors questioning if he would survive.
And it was really then that his family, I think, started to realise that he genuinely was, as his brother put it, mad.
He was on obviously getting hallucinations. He was behaving very strangely. There were complaints from the neighbours about odd behaviour. From that point on, he actually seems to have lost confidence himself. And finally, he tells his brother that he doesn't think at this stage he's really up to living on his own.
5 months after he severed his ear, Van Gogh was committed to this asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. It's an old monastery which still serves as a psychiatric hospital today.
Van Gogh came by himself and signed the registry by himself, asking him to be at the hospital, looking for a refuge, really. He knew he needed some help and he needed some peace for a while.
Nowadays, he would be classed as being bipolar, but then they would lock you up. He'd be surrounded by people in straitjackets, people wailing, people crying. It was very traumatic. Behind locked doors, bars in front of windows, cold rooms. It was a very difficult time for him.
In his letters, he wrote of being kept awake by terrible howls, as of animals in a menagerie, and he described the other men as my companions in misfortune.
The main treatment was cold baths. For Van Gogh, I think it was twice a week, a 2-hour bath. The treatment were basically useless. Proof is that most of the patients that were staying while Van Gogh was here spent all their life and died at the hospital.
But for Van Gogh, there was only one therapy that was ever really going to help.
He painted a lot. He did 150 paintings that are known of. The landscapes, the color, the sky was something that would give him peace every day.
Interestingly and very sadly, some of his best work was done when he checked himself into the asylum. And perhaps that's because he was surrounded by people all the time and people were caring for him.
And it was while he was here in the asylum that Van Gogh faced his biggest public test as an artist. In January 1890, he was invited to show his work at an exhibition in Brussels, alongside old friends like Toulouse-Lautrec. Still too ill to attend himself, the painting he chose to send was The Sunflowers.
Vincent was so proud that he'd been selected out of 20 foreign artists to be exhibited in this exhibition.
Not all the artists liked his work. They just didn't respect them.
There was one artist called Henri de Gros, and he said, "I will not be put by that abominable pot of sunflowers by Vincent." And it caused a fight. Toulouse-Lautrec stood up in honour of his friend and said, "Retract that." And there were almost daggers at dawn. This was the first time the sunflowers had been seen by the general public. They didn't understand why he was painting with such thick paint, such bright colours, so unrealistic.
Perhaps it was for the best that Van Gogh didn't make it there himself. A few months later, wanting to be closer to Theo, he checked himself out of the asylum and took a room above a restaurant in Auvers, a small town just outside Paris. But he was never to recover. On July the 27th, 1890, he packed up his easel and his paints and he went out into the countryside. And in the wheat fields outside the town, in circumstances that remain mysterious, he shot himself.
As soon as Theo knew, straight to his brother, and apparently they were chatting. Theo and Vincent smoked a pipe together, and they were talking, and then he gradually became delirious.
As he lay there, he whispered to his brother, "The sadness will last forever."
He died within a day and a half of shooting himself in Theo's arms.
This painting of farms around Auvers is one of the last that Van Gogh made, and, full disclosure, my own favourite. In it, you can just make out 4 solitary sunflowers, an echo, perhaps, of happier times. Had Van Gogh survived, had he been able to cope with his mental illness, who knows what extraordinary, unpainted masterpieces the world would have today? He was only 37 when he died, and artists often live for a long time, so we might have had another 50 years of Van Gogh as a painter. Who knows what he'd have done next? And yet, had Van Gogh not been self-tortured, had he not been mentally ill, he wouldn't have been Van Gogh, and so we wouldn't have what we do have.
I've always thought that one of the great paradoxes of, tragic paradox of Van Gogh's life is that while he was alive, really nobody could stand him. And that changes actually almost from the moment when he shot himself.
His brother Theo arranged the funeral and invited all the artists to come, and they did do. They took the paintings off of the walls and placed them around his coffin, and they also covered his coffin with flowers, mainly sunflowers. He was much admired. I mean, he truly suffered for his art. He agonized for the art world.
Ever afterwards, he's been a figure that people identify with emotionally, perhaps more than any other artist who's ever lived.
But while Vincent had no success during his life, his family were not prepared for that to go on after his death. And there were people alive who understood quite how extraordinary and beautiful these pictures were. A small platoon determined the whole world would know the name Vincent van Gogh. Less than 2 years before he died at the painfully young age of 37, Vincent van Gogh created one of the most famous works of art the world has seen, his iconic 15 sunflowers. I think there's few people who've heard of the name Van Gogh who aren't aware of his short and tragic life. All around the world, he's known as that artist who cut off his own ear, an act almost as famous as his paintings. It's possible that the drama of his life and the manner in which he left it explain some of the popularity and the mystique surrounding Van Gogh's sunflowers today. But that is only part of the story. So what was it that first brought the sunflowers to the attention of the world? It should have fallen to Theo, Van Gogh's art dealer brother, to make sure he was never forgotten. But he died just 6 months after Vincent, and it was left to Theo's widow, Jo, to carry on Van Gogh's legacy.
She could see what he had, and she knew from Theo that Vincent was a very special artist, and she was very clever at managing the legacy of his work.
She was encouraged by fellow artists to actually show Van Gogh's work, and that's exactly what she did, and she made it her life's mission to show what a great artist he was, even though he was a thorn in her side at times.
Slowly, with Jo's help, Van Gogh's paintings began to win attention. In 1910, just 20 years after his death, Sunflowers was included in a huge exhibition in London. 25,000 people queued to see it, and the British fell in love. The National Gallery couldn't let this painting go and eventually paid £1,300 to buy it from Van Gogh's sister-in-law. More people than ever before finally had access to this extraordinary canvas, and Van Gogh's popularity skyrocketed.
On March the 30th, 1987, which would have been Vincent's 134th birthday, one of the sunflowers was sold at auction, the largest sum ever received for a painting, practically $40 million.
The reserve price had been 12 million, and that in itself was seen to be quite ludicrous. It was suddenly an explosion of interest in Van Gogh. And there, from that moment onwards, he became the painter that he'd always known he could be. He has become one of the world's most highly paid artists. What I find frustrating is that in his own time, he was intensely poor and often on the breadline.
Vincent was so poor, he had to choose at one point between smoking his pipe or eating. And then 134 years after his birth, that a painting of his should sell for $40 million. It's just heartbreaking.
Although it wasn't this Sunflowers that went under the hammer, it was the third in the series, the auction sent people flooding back to the National Gallery to see what all the fuss was about. And ever since then, this slightly mysterious pot of flowers, painted by a Dutchman for a Frenchman in France, has been the single most popular thing in Britain's National Gallery.
He never painted when he was having any kind of mania or any illness. He painted when he was happy, and he did have hope. And most of the time, he was very hopeful, and they portray hope. They portray that hope and that happiness.
It's an ecstatic painting, isn't it, really? It's very joyful, and Van Gogh said that he painted it out of gratitude, but also to provide solace to other people who are suffering loneliness and isolation like himself. He's saying, really, find a connection with the natural world around you. Find this wonder, this beauty that is available in a humble flower.
The explanation behind the popularity of Sunflowers is hard to put into words. Ecstatic, joyful, yes. But there's a curious loneliness here as well. Some thrust up. Others wilt and crumple. Some stare back at us, almost like self-portraits. We're instinctively attracted to their beauty, but we are also, all of us, in the end, alone. Van Gogh once said, "I'd like to paint in such a way that everyone who has eyes could understand it." I've used a lot of words in telling this story, but the truth is, we don't really need words. We just need our eyes and our hearts. This is a painting for all people and all time. Next time on the world's greatest paintings, a canvas so famous it's been printed on our banknotes. This is by far the most loved image that Turner ever made. We follow one artist's mission.
He explodes onto the British art scene.
To be remembered long after his death.
It's Turner's gift to you from all of those years ago. He painted it for us.
It's J.M.W. Turner's Fighting Temeraire. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? Success in the modern world of art is not found in the small details. It's measured by scale of ambition, by price at auction, and your media profile. In short, size matters. This is Tate Modern, the triumphant monster among contemporary art galleries. And with nearly 6 million visitors a year, it's in the top 10 most visited galleries and museums all around the world. So, in a colossal space like this, it's entirely right that we find a hugely important painting by a giant of modern art whose fame is on an equally vast scale. When asked to name the world's most famous painter, more than 90% of us choose him. His paintings are so utterly distinctive that when you see this one whole, there is no question about who painted it. This could only be by one person, Pablo Picasso. It's his Weeping Woman, painted in 1937, and nothing quite like it had ever been made before. Once seen, however briskly, never forgotten. This is one of the most unforgettable of the many remarkable images that Picasso made during an immense career that dominates the art world of the 20th century. For a picture so strong it almost jabs you in the eyes, it's really quite small, and the subject could hardly be simpler. A woman wearing a red hat is crying. She's holding a handkerchief, and she is so grief-stricken, she's more or less chewing it. It's deceptively simple, even cartoon-like. Her face has been shaped using thick black lines and painted using a striking combination of bright acid colours and much darker reds and blues. This is a woman in torment, racked with wrenching anguish. If you look at Picasso's treatment of her face, the tears are like little raindrops or jewels, and her face is marked in grief, almost as if she's been clawed by a tiger, those deep, deep gouges and scratches in blue on the face. You very rarely see visible teeth in portraits, and the teeth are there, again, emphasizing the ugliness almost of grief. Now, this is a very powerful image, but as a Picasso painting, it's not exactly unusual. He was a very prolific artist. It's said that every single day of his working life, Picasso made at least 3 things. And of those things, 10,000 or more were paintings. So what makes this, amongst those 10,000, quite so special? Well, this is an image painted at an important hinge in the artist's life, when a horrific event in Spanish history arrived at a tumultuous moment in Picasso's complicated love life. To really understand this picture properly, we need to go back more than 100 years to the story of the young Picasso, an arrogant, cocky young man determined to take the entire art world by storm. For an arrogant, cocky young man who wanted to make his name, there was only one destination. Even from the earliest years of his life in Spain, where he was born in 1881, the place that drew this prodigious talent like a magnet was Paris.
Anyone that wanted to be a serious artist had to learn about art seriously, and that was happening in Paris. And all the galleries as well, the Louvre, Musée d'Orsay, the beautiful Arc de Triomphe. People flocked to Paris.
And for a young man like Picasso, there were, let's say, other attractions when he finally arrived in 1900, aged all of 19.
There were the bars, the brothels. It was fun, it was inspiring, and it was the place to be.
There was this kind of bohemian mix which was going on in Paris.
It attracts artists, they meet and socialize. But most importantly, they are debating the future of art. They are innovating together, they are taking risks.
I think Picasso was there just exactly at the right time.
The main influences during the early part of his time in Paris were stars of the previous generation, like Renoir and Toulouse-Lautrec. Like them, Picasso painted the world he saw around him in Montmartre, the beggars, bohemians, musicians and dance halls. But to get noticed, he had to show them in radically new ways.
This is where Picasso learns to be an artist. It's a place where he can really flower, where he can really develop, and of course experiment. And the outcome of these experiments are some of the most important and significant developments in modern art in the 20th century.
One of the greatest of his breakthrough works was the almost ugly and still shocking The Ladies of Avignon, or Demoiselles d'Avignon.
The Demoiselles d'Avignon was probably the most important painting of the first half of the 20th century. Picasso paints it in 1907. It's a brothel scene.
It's drawn from his own memories of visiting a brothel in Barcelona when he was a young man living there.
Picasso drew on his latest enthusiasm, African tribal art, and wrenched apart the rules of painting that had dominated Western art for centuries. But even that isn't what really unsettles the viewer. It's the blatant, unashamed animal directness of the brothel girls in their pain. Picasso has turned his back on the beauty and tenderness traditionally associated with nudes.
And you're looking at them sometimes from very multiple angles. So you can see a woman's buttocks and then they're twisted round and you can see her inner thigh. And you get this kind of very intimate but quite brutalized view both of woman but also of humanity.
We're looking at 5 women who do not sit there or stand there passively averting their gaze from the male viewer, but rather they return the gaze with this power, with this extraordinary confidence and sexuality. And this is what made the painting so disarming.
Most who stood in front of it weren't sure where to look. Picasso's great rival Matisse first thought it was a bad joke.
Matisse actually hated Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. He said that Picasso would be found hanged behind the work because it was so bad.
It shocked some of his other friends, and it wasn't shown for a long time because it was regarded as so revolutionary, so kind of brutal, so powerful.
The small coterie of Picasso's friends and admirers seized on this innovation, this moment, and understood and appreciated that art could never be the same again.
Everybody knows that something dramatic has changed and you have to paint your way through it or you have to reject it, but you have to face up to it.
Nowadays, many people argue that that picture was the real beginning of modern painting. But there's an enormous gap between Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and the raw emotional power of Weeping Woman. And to pursue Picasso on that journey, we have to delve deeper into his tangled emotional life and also visit one of the darkest and grimmest episodes in modern Spanish history. Picasso's Weeping Woman nods to everything he's best known for: unique methods, jolting colours, and of course the radical artistic style he personally invented. To understand the genius of this canvas, first, you need to understand Cubism. The great discovery or invention of Cubism, which Picasso and Georges Braque invented together just before the First World War, is that artists can see the world entirely differently. Instead of viewing as a single flat plane in front of them from one perspective, you can bring different perspectives into the same picture. In this 1918 still life by Picasso, he paints a table on which are strewn a guitar, playing cards, a bottle, pieces of table, half-hidden shadows. They're fragmented and jumbled up across the canvas like a broken jigsaw. Breaking reality down in order to build it up again is central to the idea of Cubism. You can, as it were, look around objects and behind them and emphasize their basic shapes. So you've got cylinders and globes and curves and lots of shadows. And by doing that, you see the world differently. Something as boring and banal as a bottle on a table or possibly a guitar suddenly looks interesting again for the very first time. Picasso revolutionized the way people looked at a canvas. It was a skill he would bring to all his most important works, and one which made him fabulously wealthy. By the 1920s, Picasso was an A-list celebrity. He was living his personal dream in a thrilling city, throbbing with excitement and opportunity.
He just became richer and richer. He could do no wrong. The more he painted, the more ideas he had, and he had a lot of ideas, the more his work sold. He became extremely wealthy very quickly.
Picasso was at the peak of his powers, his confidence and productivity overflowing. But while he was driven by everything going on in his creative world, there was one place he looked for inspiration more than most.
Picasso loved women. He loved them around. They made him feel good. As a man who was 5'4" and not particularly handsome, women flocked at his feet. Why? Because the time that they were with him, he made them feel special.
He has many love affairs. He's very charismatic. He's identified early on as a great, enormous talent. He's very seductive, and he has many relationships with women who become his muses, the inspiration, a source of kind of rejuvenation to him.
He referred to women as either goddesses or doormats and weeping machines. And it's extraordinary how they stayed with him, and they fought over one another for his love. And he depicted them time and time again.
Every important work in Picasso's collection, including The Weeping Woman, was inspired by one of his ever-changing cast of lovers. But there were some who meant much more than others. One with whom he had a very long relationship and a daughter was Marie-Thérèse Walter. Her and Picasso's grandson is Olivier.
My grandfather, Pablo Picasso, met my grandmother, my future grandmother, Marie-Thérèse, in 1927, in January, in front of the Galeries Lafayette. She was in the shop. He was looking at her through the window, and he waited outside. And when she came out, he said, "Hello, mademoiselle. I am Picasso, and I would like to make a portrait of you." So she was surprised because she had no clue who Picasso was. But she said that he was a charming man with a beautiful red tie. And this is how the story started. Marie-Thérèse was 17 years old. She was a perfect model for Pablo. She was innocent, and he was like a teacher. And step by step, she became totally addicted to this beautiful little love life.
Marie-Thérèse was the latest in what was a rather long line of women whose character and looks inspired the by now world-famous Picasso to paint and draw furiously. But being his muse wasn't a poetic fate.
Being Picasso's muse was not all it was cracked up to be. You might think, oh, it'd be great, you're living the high life and you're in one of his beautiful villas and being taken out to bars and clubs. But it was a short-lived occupation. You had to be on call, hand and foot, 24/7. There may have been two of you on the go at the same time, and you may not have known about the other one. And it was hard work. You would have to pose for him. You would have to satisfy him. You would have to make sure that he was happy, that he was watered and fed. It was almost like looking after a child.
Away from his studio on the Rue des Grands Augustins, and after nearly 10 contented and prolific years with Marie-Thérèse, Picasso finally began to find that his creative motor was running on empty.
He'd had two very, very difficult years where he'd almost decided to give up painting altogether and become a poet. And, in fact, he joked that on his tombstone he would like to have Pablo Picasso, poet, one-time painter.
But there was new inspiration on the horizon. In 1936, Picasso was at the Café Les Deux Magots, a chic and happening hotspot for Parisian intellectuals and artists, when he was introduced to a woman called Dora Maar, who would eventually be the model for Weeping Woman.
He saw this sophisticated lady seated here. She was playing with a very pointed knife, and she was jabbing with the knife between her spreaded fingers, and sometimes she was missing the target. So there was a lot of blood on her hand, and Pablo was fascinated. She was a photographer, she was an artist, she was a painter, and was far from the situation with Marie-Thérèse, the sweet Marie-Thérèse. The relationship became immediately like intense.
His newest lover, a political artist herself, opened Picasso up to the dark truths about the age they were living through. He began to think afresh and to work afresh.
And he needs something different. And certainly in the 1930s, when he encounters Dora Maar, he really needed somebody who was dark, deep, a woman who was highly intelligent, creative.
Dora Maar was really as much of an artist as Picasso was, but because she was a woman and it wasn't the #MeToo time, she didn't have her chance.
In these two portraits, we can see just how starkly their different characters impacted on his painting. In 1932's The Dreamer, Marie-Thérèse is presented lying back in a post-coital reverie. Curving, overtly sexual forms are rendered in colourful, lush, thick, soft pastel colours. She's a dance of sensual wobble. By contrast, Dora looks back at us in a more challenging way. She blazes with personality. At her ear, drinking from her mind, is a bee, which some suggest may be Picasso himself. This same bee would reappear in Weeping Woman, feeding on a tear. Red fingernails, like that bloodied knife, match the challenging pout of her mouth, and she's all acidic colours and angularity, not cuddly, but incisive. So it's unsurprising that it's Dora who would now change the way that Picasso thought and painted.
Picasso thought that she was extraordinary. She was gutsy, she was fiery, she was not afraid, and he found that very attractive.
It was at the height of his affair with the more mature and challenging Dora, early in 1937, that Picasso was asked to paint something for the Paris International Exhibition, a huge art show opening that summer.
He accepts the commission, and it's going to have to be pretty fast because it has to be finished by June. And the evolution of the painting is quite strange because Picasso has absolutely no idea for the first 2 or 3 months what he's going to do.
Picasso struggles. He got this kind of block.
It was Dora who got him out of his creative hole. In April 1937, she pushed a report about a wartime atrocity under his nose.
It was Dora Maar who brought Pablo's newspaper showing that a village in Spain has been attacked by German planes, dropping bombs everywhere. I've seen the article in the newspaper, so the description was horrible.
First pictures from the Basque Republic of the holy city of Guernica, scene of the most terrible air raid our modern history yet can boast. Hundreds were killed here, men, women, and children. 4,000 bombs were dropped out of a blue sky into a hell that raged unchecked for 5 murderous hours.
Picasso's homeland was being torn apart by a bitter civil war, pitching nationalists against republicans. The nationalists were helped by the Nazi and Italian fascist forces, who had decimated Guernica, largely, it seems, out of mere curiosity to see what a large-scale air raid could do. The attack had no strategic purpose.
They come in, saturation, bombing, sucking the oxygen out, and totally destroying the city.
70% of the city was destroyed and 1/3 of the population was wiped out.
The first time that there has been bombing of that scale in Europe. It's the catastrophe which alerts us to what modern warfare was going to look like.
Reading about Guernica, Picasso was incensed, and he knew he'd found the subject for his Paris exhibition mural.
He said and believed that art is the lie that told the truth, and he wanted the world to know. And Picasso was such a big, majestic superstar now in the art world that he felt that the only way to communicate the truth was through art, because art communicates better than any language, and and it breaks down language barriers.
The work he painted furiously in just a few weeks, the precursor to his Weeping Woman, is called simply Guernica. It now hangs in Madrid's Reina Sofia, where more than 4 million people come to see it every single year. Manuel Borja Virel is the museum's director.
He had many photographs of bombings in Spain. We know that he was looking at the newsreels. We know he was looking at the newspaper. And he's trying to understand this period and using media of the period, but through the tools of a painter. So that's why the painting is black and white, which is the color of the newsreels.
This lack of colour gives added impact to a canvas full of writhing, screaming, dying people and animals, rendered in flattened Cubist caricature.
He reacts with this painting to all these horrors. He reacts also to a new type of violence, the fact that the murder of a complete population could be done in a kind of administrative way.
In 1937, Picasso's mother wrote to him from Barcelona. She described how smoke from the burning city was making her eyes water. And it was this image of a crying woman in a devastated city that then began to play on his mind. In this painting, that distraught woman is a hugely powerful figure. The real-life model for this and the Weeping Woman was Dora. As Picasso worked, Dora was constantly at his side, photographing his progress. She even added the flex on the horse's flank herself.
We see that the tongue, that the scream of the woman could be like an arrow against the bombs, an arrow against the monstrosity, and also the breast. In many cases, they are like bombs, and the top of the breast is like the fuse of the bomb. So what he's telling us is that there is an element of resistance and an element that will be able, through poetry, through the communality of the suffering, overcome the barbarity of the monstrosity of the war.
The bombing of Guernica and his relationship with Dora, a woman in so many ways his equal, changed everything for Picasso. Up to this point, his paintings had centered around Planet Pablo. Now he was making a political statement. It packed a punch, but it did not land him much instant acclaim.
When the painting was first presented in 1937, I mean, of course, there was a group of people that thought it was great, but many people didn't like it. For some avant-garde artists, this was too much of a billboard. This was too much of a propaganda element. On the other hand, many people thought it was too abstract. So in a way, Guernica was caught between the people that thought it was too obvious and the people that thought it was too abstract.
In time, this canvas would find a significant place in the world, but for now, Picasso was restless. Although his great anti-war masterpiece was now finished, Picasso was transfixed by the sufferings of the Spanish, and in particular, that idea of the tears running down the face of his own mother. That became in his head the simplest of images, a weeping, desolate woman. And this was the figure he now needed to immortalize. Pablo Picasso's Weeping Woman is a powerful image of the Spanish Civil War. Having completed and then exhibited his large-scale anti-war canvas, Guernica, he spent weeks obsessively painting and sketching the same tearful woman over and over again, a woman inspired by his mother and modelled on his lover, Dora Maar. This one, his final and widely considered his best, was completed in just a few days. When you get up close and personal with this picture, one of the things you notice very quickly is the thickness of the paint. Now, this is interesting because a lot of the time at this period, Picasso paints quite thinly. He puts great washes of colour, and the paint is really there to serve the drawing, not the other way around. This is different. At times, he's put on so much paint, it's almost on the edge of falling off the canvas. That is interesting because it just shows how hard he was working on this picture. This is a picture he sweated over and worked again and reworked and reworked and reworked until for him it was absolutely perfect. And the sweaty intensity of that physical effort really amplifies his hugely bold choice of colours. What he's done is he's used all the warm, generous colours, the reds and the golds and the yellows and the oranges, but he's pushed them to the back of the picture plane. They're the wall behind the girl, they're the red carpet on which she's standing. Her own face is painted almost entirely in cold, cold colours, lots of white, lots of icy blue, lots of cold, acidic greens. So he's making the desolation vivid through the colours and the choice of colours. It has the raw urgency, not of an academic painting, but of a piece of graffiti in the New York Underground. Brilliant graffiti, I grant you. Picasso is using Cubist distortion, not to show off a new way of seeing or painting, but to show that he, as a modern painter, can represent human desolation and sorrow as emotionally and effectively as any of the great masters of the High Renaissance. This powerful image had a profound effect on an old and close friend of Picasso's. An artist and voracious collector of modern art, Roland Penrose, was visiting Pablo Picasso when he saw it in his studio. He was blown away by the painting's savagery and its power, and even though the paint was barely dry, he asked if he could buy it.
Roland Penrose wanted it. He was desperate to have that painting. And I think it's a recognition, really, of the closeness of their friendship that he allowed Roland to buy it from him.
Picasso sold it to him for £284, £19,000 in today's money. In the back of Penrose's mind were the germs of an idea. He could send it out on a tour with Picasso's first anti-war masterpiece.
He organised both Guernica and Weeping Woman to go around and be shown as a way of highlighting the plight of the people of the Spanish Civil War.
It was really an attempt to alert and raise money by touring this extraordinary work. First of all, it starts in London in the Burlington Galleries, just off Bond Street. And it's not a huge success, but it is supported by people like Virginia Woolf and E.M. Forster, and who give subscriptions to showing it. And it visits other towns. I think it goes to Sheffield. And then it comes back to London, to the Whitechapel.
And 15,000 people come to see the painting. It is opened by Clement Attlee, the leader of the opposition, leader of the Labour Party and subsequent Prime Minister. And it's a great rallying call for the working class in the East End to support the Republican cause in Spain. And apparently the ticket price was a pair of boots to donate to soldiers and workers in Spain who are facing this fascist onslaught.
Picasso's first political works had finally made their mark, 580 miles from the atrocity they portrayed. When the now triumphant tour was over, Penrose took Weeping Woman back to the home he shared with his wife, the photographer Lee Miller, and their son Anthony. He still has very strong memories of the man who painted it, his father's great friend, the now middle-aged Picasso.
When Picasso came here in 1950, he immediately liked it. He felt very at home. He liked the animals on the farm. And he liked things like plum pudding and stuff like that my mother gave him to eat, and Scotch whiskey. He was very keen on that.
At the time, Anthony was just a child.
Well, I was instantly drawn to Picasso because he had this incredible warmth and friendliness and this capacity to really engage with me as a child. We invented a game. I was the bull, and it was my job to put my horns on and charge across the room and try and knock Picasso over. But he was so quick on his feet that he'd jump out of the way at the last minute, and I would go splat into the wall, and I got fed up with going splat into the wall, so I thought of a different strategy. And I watched and waited, and when he wasn't looking, I crept up and I bit him. And he bit me right back. And in the moment before I started to yell, my mum heard him say, "Huh, that's the first Englishman I've ever bitten."
Picasso's Weeping Woman also left its mark on the young Anthony.
I guess I must have been about 8 years old, and I asked my mum, "Why is the lady crying?" And she said, "The lady used to live in a town called Guernica. And one day, without any warning at all, airplanes came over and started dropping bombs. And they killed lots of people and they set fire to the whole place. And they might have even killed her little boy." It gave me an enduring fascination with what was behind that painting. If you look at the woman's eyes, you can see what appear to be the silhouettes of airplanes. Now, she'd probably never, ever seen an airplane in her life before, and suddenly they were there droning through the sky and dropping bombs and killing everybody. That image would have been seared into her retina, if you like, forever. We can see that she is absolutely distraught.
That anger, that pain is what makes Weeping Woman so unforgettable. Now, there are people who think that great art should be like a warm bath, calm and reassuring, a kind of ointment for the pains of daily life. But it seems to me that if art is great, it ought to be able to represent all of human life. And that means the pain and the anger and the sorrow as well. An ointment, a warm bath, this is more like a barbed wire face mask. The Weeping Woman was an extraordinary painting to have on the walls of Penrose's London flat, and it had been part of their lives for more than 30 years when the next page turned in the remarkable story of this painting. Roland and his wife Lee were at home in their Sussex farmhouse in April 1969 when they got a phone call.
It was my father's housekeeper from the apartment in London, and she was distraught. She was sobbing into the phone. The place had been broken into, the whole place had been trashed. The thieves had stolen absolutely the cream of the crop. There were several Picassos. There were, of course, some really important works, but the star of them all was the Weeping Woman. She had gone. My parents were absolutely devastated. They didn't have those paintings in their lives because of the monetary value. They had them there because of their importance as works of art, and to have them taken away, it was like a bereavement. It was a really shattering loss.
Picasso's great and troubling portrait had vanished, if not into thin air, then certainly into the grey London smog. By coincidence, the Metropolitan Police had just established a specialist art theft squad who are now on the case, and a reward worth nearly £500,000 in today's money was offered.
The investigation into the theft went on for quite a long time and not much happened. But then the police found an informer who pretended to be a go-between between Roland and the thieves. And the police were tailing him when the thieves took him to where the paintings were hidden. It was in a shop in South London. Unknown to anybody, that day, a demolition team had moved in to tear down the shop and give it a makeover. So the thieves saw what was going on, and they just went straight on past, and the police were following them, went straight on past, and the whole thing came to nothing.
It seemed as if this great painting about loss might itself be lost forever. Picasso's Weeping Woman is one of the artist's earliest and most powerful pieces of political propaganda. An image of a distraught woman which speaks to us as powerfully today as the year she was painted in response to a wartime atrocity. But in 1969, after more than 30 years as part of a private collection, hanging unseen in a London flat and, frankly, forgotten by the wider world, this extraordinary painting was stolen right off the wall. The Penrose family were terrified that Weeping Woman had disappeared forever. A major police sting operation had failed dismally, and unknown to all but the thieves, the paintings were hidden in a shop which was about to be gutted.
Two of the workmen were tasked with clearing out all the junk, and they went into the basement and they pulled out the works, and one of them said, "Oh, it's all rubbish, burn it." And the other one, he thought, might be a bob's worth in this. And so he took the Weeping Woman to an artist's materials shop. They saw that it was hand-painted in oils and it was signed Picasso, so they thought it might be important. And they called the police. And of course, all hell broke loose in that moment.
Stolen from under their noses and coming perilously close to being dumped in a bin, Weeping Woman was finally back, safe and sound.
My father went to Chelsea police station, where they were all stacked up in a cell for safekeeping. And he said, for the first time in his life, he wept for joy to see them all back and safe.
The responsibility of owning such a painting could not have been made any clearer. And in 1987, Anthony's father gave Weeping Woman to the Tate. And she's been there ever since.
She's meant to be out there, telling people about the atrocity of war.
For the first time in half a century, Picasso's masterpiece was on public display. People flocked to see it and experience for themselves just how remarkable she is.
It's very bold, it's very powerful, and of course, intensely sad. And I think you get almost the feeling of the emotion of her.
The painting, I think, is universally moving, and that's Picasso's brilliance, that's his achievement. He's able to take the particularity of that story of these poor civilians bombed from the air, terrified, injured, suffering, and make this very personal, private painting that speaks of kind of universal pain and grief, that eruption of sorrow that cannot be constrained.
I think it embodied everything that people understood about that whole era and the tragedies that occurred, not just in the Spanish Civil War, but also in World War II.
By the time Picasso died on the 8th of April 1973, he was the most influential artist of the 20th century. His Weeping Woman is a hugely important part of his legacy. But what about the woman who inspired the painting? Picasso's relationship with Dora Maar lasted until the 1940s, when he dumped her for his next muse.
Dora had, I think, a nervous breakdown after the relationship with Picasso finally collapsed.
Picasso felt very guilty. She always said it wasn't because of him, but he felt guilty. He bought her a house, and she more or less lived on her own for the rest of her life.
Weeping Woman is actually the best painting of Dora Maar because it showed her true soul, and I can imagine her weeping like that almost daily towards the end of her relationship and thereafter over Picasso.
Of course, if you get too close to the sun, you get burnt. And that was the tragedy, in a sense, of Dora. And of course, the power of his presence in the art world and the art scene would mean that she would be overshadowed for a huge amount of time.
No longer. Maar is herself today celebrated as a very important artist, and her relationship with Picasso was about much more than its ending. Weeping Woman is testament to that.
Weeping Woman is a tremendously important image because it's a universal image that we can all relate to. It's a picture that talks about suffering And unfortunately, at one time or other, we are all used to suffering.
I've known this painting for a long time, but I'd never realized before just how political it is. And I'm not just talking about the Spanish Civil War, I'm talking about relations between men and women. They say the personal is political, and that was certainly the case for Pablo Picasso. The Weeping Woman is as powerful today as she has ever been. There are plenty of paintings, perfectly well made, which somehow become limp and lifeless over time. And there are other paintings which radiate energy and become more alive and draw us in as time goes on. This picture crackles and fizzes with energy. It is impossible to be in the presence of the Weeping Woman and ignore her. And if you're looking for a definition of a great painting, that is about as clear as you can get. Next time, the final masterpiece of a truly iconic artist. People come into these rooms for that sense of serenity, and they walk out feeling calm and reassured about the world. This is the story of personal tragedy.
He became so depressed that he stopped painting.
Brutal violence.
He could hear the fighting, he could hear the bombs. So many young soldiers were killed.
And insatiable obsession behind Claude Monet's Water Lilies. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brainpower. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? The National Gallery in London is a treasure trove of more than 2,000 paintings. Some of these canvases make us feel patriotic or devout. Others fill us with horror. But there's one particular painting hanging on these walls which has caused blood pressures to rise in private and in public ever since it was first made nearly 400 years ago. It's Diego Velázquez's Rokeby Venus. It shows the mythological goddess of love, Venus, reclining very much at her leisure, gazing into a mirror held by her son, Cupid. The Rokeby Venus, it got the name a little more than 200 years ago in honor of its last private owner. What is really good art? Really good art, I would say, is art that has a physical effect on the viewer. So your heart rate goes up, you feel goosebumps at the back of your neck, the hairs on the back of your neck go up. You have a physical, emotional reaction to what you're seeing, and it might be fear or horror or whatever. In this case, it's certainly a very, very strong emotional reaction. You watch people watching this picture, and they stop and they gasp, and you can tell they are emotionally affected. The subtle magic of this particular Venus is all about watching and feeling. We look at her looking at a reflection of herself, or perhaps is she watching us standing in the gallery? When it was made, this kind of image was outlawed, forbidden, and certainly never to be seen in public. And then many, many years later, when it was already hanging on these walls, it was subjected to a ferocious physical attack. And the scars are still visible even today if you look hard enough. The story of how this simple-looking painting has triggered so many different and powerful responses is itself quite a tale. And it's one that begins with unlikely origins in that glittering era when Spain dominated the world.
The Spanish Golden Age was an extraordinary time in European history. Spain was an empire. Spanish territories extended beyond Iberia to Italy, to Northern Europe, and to the Americas.
It's conquest, colonization, expansion, and trade. They have an unbelievable amount of money, silver and gold coming from the New World that could pay for the arts and, you know, the patronage of arts.
It was into this world of massive wealth and huge opportunity that Velázquez was born in 1599 in Seville.
He came from quite a large family, one of 6 children, very educated. He was very talented from a very, very early age. And when he was aged 11, he went and studied art as an apprentice to the local artist.
The city was famed for its flourishing art scene, and the young Velázquez's new mentor and future father-in-law, Francisco Pacheco, was an influential figure across Seville. Although, as these 2 paintings show, the first of a merchant couple by Pacheco, and the second one of Pacheco by Velázquez, it didn't take long for the young man to surpass his rather wooden master, a talent that would culminate in the Rokeby Venus.
Velázquez is a unique artist. So he's often seen as being astonishing illusionism. His pictures look real, but they're not.
He didn't follow what every other artist was doing. He liked to use loose handling of paint. He used to use long brushes, for example, which was very radical at the time, but it gave him that flick that he wanted, that sort of impressionistic flick. He had this ability to keep paint looking fresh, as though it was still wet. Like double cream, you know, there's parts of it that you feel as though you want to just go up and lick. They look so luscious.
He was already a technically astonishing painter when he left Pacheco to set up in his own studio and accept commissions when he was just 18 years old.
We don't know much about his personality, but he was driven, he was ambitious, he was talented. He was loved by everybody, by all his patrons.
And also his subject matter was unconventional. He liked to use real people that he knew and was familiar with. And he would go to the taverns and he would draw and paint the people there.
He actually had a passion for reality, a passion for textures, a passion for the things that were around him.
By his early 20s, Velázquez was the prime painter of Seville. And if you look at those early paintings, it's clear that he was obsessed by the real. They're paintings of the stink and the dust of the streets. He captured ordinary, everyday life with remarkable verve and energy. But the deeply ambitious man who'd paint the Rokeby Venus wanted, above all else, to paint the extraordinary. His opportunity finally came in 1623, when his subjects would quite definitely be keeping their clothes on. Velázquez was summoned to Madrid to paint the portrait of the new young king, Philip IV, and this was a huge risk. Do it really well, and what follows? Money, obviously, but also fortune and reputation. Bog it up, however, and it is instant humiliation, immediate failure, and skulking back to the shadows for the rest of your dibbity-dabbity painterly life. The National Gallery's Rokeby Venus is a jewel from the Spanish Golden Age. It's the work of Diego Velázquez, one of the most precocious, ambitious, and brilliant painters the world has seen. I think the wonderful thing about Velázquez as a painter is the way he just loads his brush with a bit of paint and uses no more than he actually absolutely needs. It's an extraordinary self-confidence in his painting. The brushwork is quite loose. The edges of Venus's body are almost impossible to pinpoint. They're the opposite of the very hard drawing of the Renaissance you get so often. And so if you look at the little strip of cloth being held by the Cupid over the mirror, there's just tiny little flickers of paint, tiny little bits of white and pink, almost no paint there at all, and certainly it's not delicately painted in because he didn't need to. He gave the impression. This is remarkably modern painting. It almost feels like an instinct he was born with, but Velázquez would need more than that to make a successful career in 17th century Spain. From the time he first stepped into an artist's studio, aged about 11, it was clear that Velázquez had real talent, and he didn't have to wait very long into his maturity for his first big break. Because in 1623, aged just 24, he was summoned to Madrid to paint the custard-faced, slack-jawed, girlishly lipped, and intensely vain king. The 18-year-old Philip IV had been on the throne for a couple of years, but he was already a prolific patron to the few artists permitted to loiter around his court. One of them, Rodrigo de Villandrando, painted this portrait of him just before he became king. If Velázquez could nail this all-or-nothing commission, he'd be set up for life.
The two most important patrons in Spain during the 17th century were the church and the court. One always hoped for a royal commission. This is what most artists strove to achieve, to be invited to Madrid to paint for the king.
It was a dream come true for Velázquez. His subject, however, was about as challenging as could be.
I think it may have been difficult for Velázquez to paint a flattering portrait of Philip IV.
They say of the king that he only ever smiled 3 times in his whole life, and that he was very inward, kept himself to himself. If he was out at a public affair, very often people would do a double take because he was so still they thought it was a statue.
After weeks of working and no doubt taking a mighty deep breath, he unveiled his portrait to the wary king.
Philip was absolutely impressed. He said it was extraordinary, that it was amazing, that it was lifelike, and nobody ever painted like he did.
It was an amazing portrait. To see him in a painting as though he's human and actually got blood in his veins was something quite extraordinary.
He was so flattered, and he wanted to have Velázquez as the only painter who portrayed himself and his family.
For a man still only 24 years old, this was a remarkable rise to the heights of his profession. Velázquez immediately left Seville and set up shop at the king's lavish Madrid court.
Life inside the royal palace for Velázquez was amazing. He had his own studio, he had medical cover, he got a wage, food, lodgings. He was invited to be even wardrobe master to the royal family, decorator to the palace. He travelled around and bought works of art for the palace. He was treated as though he was royalty himself.
He particularly became King Philip's friend. Philip was very stiff to everybody else and courtly. He made this persona, but with Velázquez, he was very relaxed.
Velázquez's new patron was a rich king who loved him. Surely here was an artist who could now paint whatever he wanted, including a classical nude, as all recent great artists had done. Absolutely not. Why? Because this was the heyday of the infamous Spanish Inquisition.
Its purpose was to combat heresy and to maintain Catholic orthodoxy.
Founded in 1478, this was the most formidable force in the Spanish Empire. Religious fundamentalists, secret police, torturers, judges, juries, and executioners in a single organization.
It was extremely zealous. The Inquisition meted out dreadful tortures, the rack, or pouring gallons of water down people's throats, all in order to get them to confess to crimes that they maybe or maybe did not commit.
The Inquisition was absolutely feared in Spain. It created a climate of terror. It created that was the most terrible thing.
The Inquisition's tentacles reached into all areas of life, from everyday moral decisions to the standards of high art.
According to the rules of the Spanish Inquisition, producing images of female nudes was considered indecorous.
They were considered something that may provoke unwanted sex or even rape. So the power of the painting was more than just the paint. If you were found to have any of these paintings, you would be expelled from Spain. And of course, the paintings would have been destroyed.
To make things a little more complicated, his father-in-law, Francisco Pacheco, was in charge of assessing paintings on behalf of the Inquisition. And so it's easy to see for the time being why Velázquez didn't stray far from the palace. Besides, limited subject matter wasn't going to curb his vision.
As a court painter to the king, he was very close to the royal family. So he painted not only the King of Spain, but also the Queen and their children, and also dwarfs and jesters and other members of the Spanish royal household. What Velázquez brought to his portraiture was a heightened sense of realism. He was able to breathe life into his subjects and his sitters, and he was able to convey the illusion that what one was looking at was not just a painted likeness, but an actual living presence.
It was so real. It was so, lifelike. It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you. It was like a direct connection because of the way he depicted them.
And it's this dedicated, hard-boiled realism which makes all his painting, and this canvas in particular, so remarkable.
If there's one thing we know about Velázquez is again and again and again is an almost shocking directness, a realism. You see dirty feet, you see distended bellies, you see wine bottles dripping with water. Always it's the material and the real. And I think you see it again in the flesh of the Venus here. She is unquestionably, undoubtedly, a real living human being. There is blood coursing just below that skin.
It was to be more than 25 years before he'd get the chance to paint his Venus. That window of opportunity finally opened in 1649, when the king permitted the now 49-year-old painter to pack his easel and brushes and head for Italy.
Velázquez went to Italy in order to learn from Italian artists, from Renaissance artists, and also from his contemporaries.
Also to just have more experience outside the court that was very restrictive. He wanted to explore new subjects, which were not the royal family, and in Italy he could do this.
This journey to the heart of Rome was the chance to fulfill his greatest creative ambition, to paint a nude Venus in the classical tradition. But he still had to take on other commissions, and they didn't come much bigger than the one from the Vatican.
He painted a portrait of Pope Innocent X. Velázquez was very audacious, and he adds a layer of realism here in his portrayal of the Pope. If you look at the face, it's incredibly naturalistic in the way in which he portrays his expression, not idealizing his appearance, because he had a very prominent nose, and also portraying him almost with a scowl. And it's thought that when the Pope laid eyes on this painting for the first time, he exclaimed, "È troppo vero," it's too real, it's too true.
Away from the suffocating constraints of life in Spain, here was finally the opportunity for which he'd waited most of his life. Velázquez squared his shoulders and began the Rokeby Venus.
Now, there are no records which tell us exactly where Velázquez was when he began work on the Rokeby Venus.
But when you look at what he'd have seen in Italy, it's not hard to see where his inspiration may have come from.
Here, for instance, is the sleeping hermaphrodite, or the Borghese hermaphrodite. It's actually an ancient classical statue which had been excavated. And it shows a woman lying in a very similar attitude to the Rokeby Venus, and we know that Velázquez took a bronze cast of this back with him to Madrid, so it clearly meant quite a lot to him. And then here we have two examples of the most blatant full frontal nudes done up till then in Western art. This is Giorgione's Sleeping Venus, now sometimes attributed to Titian, and she's absolutely full frontal. And here, finally, is the very famous Venus of Urbino, painting definitely by Titian, and, as it were, the reflection of the Rokeby Venus from the front rather than the back. In this case, Venus is full awake, and she's looking at us with a very frank expression indeed. And what we have to remember is that these are images that Velázquez could not possibly have seen in Madrid. They would have been forbidden. He had to see them in Rome.
We will never know for sure who his model was or how long he took to capture her, but what we do know is that Velázquez's painting took the traditional nude portrait into a new dimension. And for such a radical, substantial change, he used the very lightest of touches.
It's a very soft painting, very few colours in the image. It's really only pinks, greys and a bit of blue.
If you get up close to that painting, it's very difficult to distinguish one brush mark from another, which gives it this lovely sort of pearly quality. He's really fascinated by the whiteness or the paleness of her flesh. And he obviously deliberately uses, perhaps rather provocatively, the black sheet to enhance that sense of paleness. So it's quite a sexy picture.
But it's impossible to believe that this was just an erotic exercise for the painter. There is enigma and subtlety in this painting. It adds up to much more than the sum of its parts.
I mean, it's a really puzzling picture. It's deliberately ambiguous. It's unusual at the time in that he's presenting the nude from behind. Usually the nude was painted reclining, but facing the spectator.
But here she gazes back at the spectator via a mirror.
If you look at the reflection in the mirror doesn't quite add up, so it's not really a reflection of Venus. First of all, the face in the mirror is much older than Venus's, so that might be a way of saying nothing lasts forever, everything is temporary, and everything ages and gets uglier and drops south.
And if you actually look at the face of the Venus, she's got this sort of slight blush and quite a petite face, whereas the face in the mirror is much larger, it's blurred, and it's looking out at the spectator. It's sometimes described as the Venus effect, but the proportions seem to be all over the place, which adds to the mystery.
It's not especially clear whom she's looking at. And this is an open question. He deliberately leaves it open. He deliberately leaves it ambiguous. Is she looking at the spectator? Is she gazing at her own reflection?
The mirror is key to this image, front and center. It's the focal point of the canvas. But more than that, from here, Venus can see exactly who's looking at her. Velázquez made a painting that's really all about how we look at it, the feelings we have in response to his subject.
Titian's nudes are often described as being unrealistically curvy, but Velázquez's Venus was frank. This is a real woman. You take the models and you add the Velázquez touch, material, direct, earthy, frank, blatant, and you get something that had never happened in quite this way in Western art before.
Velázquez loved his time in Italy, the free and easy ways of Italian life. Unfortunately for him, his year in the cultural sun couldn't last forever. King Philip IV was desperate for his return, so in early 1651, Velázquez finally headed back to Madrid. But what would he do with his newly painted Venus, a canvas that could get him into serious trouble with the Spanish Inquisition?
He rolled her up and took the Rokeby Venus back to Madrid, back home. Venus undraped in the lion's den. Risky. So why would Velázquez take such a gamble with his own personal safety for this image?
This remarkable 17th century masterpiece, popularly known as the Rokeby Venus, is by Diego Velázquez.
Velázquez was the great painter of the Spanish Golden Age. There was nobody who came within a country mile of Velázquez's ambition, the cheeky, fluid directness of his brush, and the sheer force of his intellect. And yet, amongst all those wonderful portraits, the mysterious court scenes, the battle paintings, the Rokeby Venus stands out alone.
Because nudes were outlawed by the Spanish Inquisition, Velázquez had painted her in Italy, but then he took the monumental gamble of returning to Madrid with his canvas. Why on earth did he take the risk? Well, he seems to have had a buyer lined up for it, and remarkably, the evidence is still there in black and white at Madrid's Casa de Alba archive. Dr. Mar Doval is a local Velázquez scholar.
This is the inventory written in 1651, the 1st of June, on the belongings of the Marquis of Elite. There are many entries, as you can see, and each number is possessions of the Marquis, and in this case, paintings. And the one important for us is this one, number 222. And in this case, it's very well described. It says, una pintura en lienzo, a painting on canvas, that's important, of a nude woman lying on clothes, pintada de espaldas, painted from the back, leaning on her right arm and looking at the mirror, held by the boy. De la mano de Velázquez, by the hand of Velázquez. We know that that picture was in that collection. And we know that picture was painted by Velázquez.
So who was the Marquess of Elite? Well, he was a well-known nobleman and a flamboyant roué. He did know a lot about art, and he knew what he liked.
He was an eccentric guy, an eccentric collector of women, an eccentric collector of art. He was one of the most important collectors in Spain.
He was a very powerful man. He was about 30 years younger than Velázquez, and he was very charismatic. He was apparently very ugly.
The Marquis, yeah, he wasn't a very handsome man, but he enjoyed life, and he liked women very much. Women and art. And he had a very impressive collection of art. Paintings by Titian, Velázquez, from Raphael, and he wanted to have the best painters. And Velázquez was the king's painter.
He now had a prized new painting, but where could he display it without falling foul of the Inquisition's vice squad? Like many secrets, the answer is locked behind closed doors. Literally. The Spanish elite's solution for keeping their forbidden pleasures away from disapproving eyes were called salas reservadas.
They were started by Philip II, who had a huge collection of nude paintings, and they were secret rooms within the palace or in the houses of nobility, where men who collected art could have their own secret nude paintings.
Philip IV increased the collection of nudes, and he would retire there after the siesta, after eating.
At the time, nude paintings of women would have been considered like top-shelf porn, you know, for male amusement, male pleasure.
These paintings were covered with curtains who were drawn if women were supposed to go there, like the Queen, for instance. But if men were there, obviously, it was to be delighted by these nudes.
All of the rich, powerful men would have had these hidden secret chambers. And that's where they would retire for the evening, gone for hours or 2 minutes, depending.
And although it knew about the secret rooms, the Inquisition was checkmated, unable to get a grip on the fashion for secret salons, even if its clerical police suspected this was getting out of hand.
Most of the high clergy possessed these paintings called indecent pictures. So they couldn't really expel bishops or cardinals or even the king from that matter. So there was a kind of double standards of doing public morality and personal taste.
His Venus had a fervent new admirer, but Velázquez returned to his fully clothed subjects at the royal court. The ideas he explored in the Rokeby Venus would reappear in his later works, most clearly in Las Meninas, one of his final portraits of the royal family.
The Rokeby Venus may be seen as a kind of dry-run precursor to Las Meninas because the two have in common the mirror and the way in which he manipulates the reflection in the mirror and opens up the possibilities for interpreting what we see in the painting. Where is the Venus's gaze directed? And where are the king and queen?
And in what is, on the face of it, an intimate family portrait, Velázquez has painted himself into the heart of the composition. He has, in effect, photobombed his employers.
He was implying that he was part of the family and introducing just reflections of the king and his wife in the background of the painting. You see someone dressed up as a nobleman in the act of painting. It's a kind of symbolism. It's a kind of metaphor that he finally achieved what he wanted.
4 years after finishing this painting, 61-year-old Velázquez died and was buried in a church which once stood in this square.
After Velázquez's death, he really does become one of the most famous Spanish artists who ever lived.
Centuries later, he was still held in the highest esteem. Picasso, Manet, Goya, they all looked back to Velázquez and said that he was the painter's painter, he was the greatest of them all. No one has surpassed him.
And a painting by the greatest of them all would always find a home. So it was, at the end of the 18th century, Venus became the property of another member of the political elite, a newly appointed Prime Minister, Manuel de Godoy.
Manuel Godoy had a collection of nudes following the tradition of the hidden displays.
The Inquisition was still actively hunting out immoral painting, but that threat didn't stop Godoy commissioning Francisco Goya to paint a nude for his collection. While he was inspired by Velázquez and his remarkable Venus, what Goya painted, known as the Maja, was altogether more risque.
There is no Cupid, there is no mirrors, there is nothing of that kind. The body is frontal in the Goya's Maja, and Velázquez is from the back. She's actually looking at us. She's engaging with the viewer directly and is inviting the viewer to enjoy her. So the eroticism in this is much clearer and less concealed.
It's said that Godoy owned Goya's naked Maja and had the Rokeby Venus together in one room. And that would have created a huge stir had people known.
The unpopular Godoy's enemies rejoiced in 1808 when, following a tip-off, his private booty room was raided. The Rokeby Venus was exposed to the hostile gaze of the Spanish Inquisition, and over the following years, Godoy was hauled into court.
He had to stand trial in front of the Inquisition, and he was asked why he had these paintings, and he said, well, he was an art lover, and he also said that they were following in the great traditions of other great artists like Tintoretto and Titian, but it didn't do any good.
The Inquisition forced him to name the artist behind the image far more scandalous than the Rokeby Venus, the naked Maja, and so Goya found himself dragged in to be questioned.
He tried to legitimize the portrayal of his nude by comparing it to the Rokeby Venus. He defended the quality and the and the fantastic composition and colors that Velázquez used at that time for him to emulate.
Goya turned around and said, well, no, actually, Velázquez did it before me, and Velázquez was the greatest painter, and I'm just following in his footsteps.
It was a clever defense. Velázquez was now beyond reproach, a Spanish hero for the ages who could do no wrong.
If he could paint a nude, then Goya could get away with it. And that was basically how he escaped from serious punishment by the Inquisition.
Velázquez's Venus had effectively saved Goya from potential exile. So the next chapter of this masterpiece's story is all the more surprising. Set as it is in Yorkshire. After he was disgraced, Godoy's collection was broken up and Venus was sold to another politician, John Morritt, MP of Rokeby Park, near Barnard Castle.
So the Rokeby Venus got her anglicized name because of Rokeby Park, where it ended up in the 19th century.
And it stays there on through different generations of the family, apparently hung above the chimney piece, so that when the connoisseurs came, they could steal a glance up at it, while ladies could avert their eyes away from the painting.
She might have changed country, ending up in a very different part of Europe from where she'd first started. But once again, the Rokeby Venus was hidden behind an elegant private door to be peeped at only by the house guests of Rokeby Park. She was like a courtesan, a kept woman, hidden behind high private walls, no peeking by the plebs.
The Rokeby Venus hung there for nearly a century before the Morritt family were forced to sell her to pay a massive tax bill in 1905.
Art dealers purchased the Rokeby Venus and then put her straight back on the market with a huge asking price of £45,000, which would be £5.5 million in today's money. They were going to have to shop around for a buyer.
But what would happen next to the Rokeby Venus? More politics and a nasty surprise. For the first 250 years of the Rokeby Venus's life, this enigmatic painting had been locked behind closed doors.
In 1905, this extraordinary piece was put up for sale, and in a shameless attempt to enthuse as many buyers as possible, the Rokeby Venus was sent off on her very first public tour.
Suddenly, the painting found itself displayed all over the country: Manchester, Liverpool, Edinburgh.
It's extraordinary because it goes from behind a sealed room where it's only for a select pair of male eyes into the public arena where everybody can come and see it for free. And they're amazed by it. And not just the subject matter, but also the painting technique.
Not everyone likes the painting. Some people think she's not a very attractive woman. You know, she's ugly. She's too thin. She's too scrawny. But I think all this debate, you know, just garners interest.
So when the news broke that it might be sold abroad, there was a public outcry to save the Venus for Britain.
The National Art Collection Fund launched a campaign to save it for the nation, knowing full well that the Treasury is not going to act and put up the funds to acquire the painting. So lots of people put in subscriptions.
The British public wanted to keep it here because it was such an astounding painting. You know, it's part of a great, important history, and we wanted it to be seen.
The cause seemed pretty hopeless, with the sums raised falling short, but then help came from an unexpected and royal direction.
The King, Edward VII, meets the shortfall by offering a donation and also a loan, which enables the Art Collection Fund to acquire the painting for the nation in 1906. It becomes the nation's Venus.
And the King wanted this national treasure saved so it could be admired by everyone.
It goes on public display for the first time in 1906 at the National Gallery.
People flocked to the National Gallery to see her. A legend had built up about this artist, this Spanish artist from the 17th century, and people queued to see her.
The men used to like to go and see it. First of all, they could get a sneak at some flesh, and the women used to like to go and see it because they felt empowered by it. You know, I'm turning my back on you blokes.
For the next decade, all the millions of people who came to look at her were met by the Rokeby Venus's unchanging gaze. But the world beyond her eyeline was changing. The suffragette women's movement was at its height, fighting for the right to vote and against countless inequalities and prejudices.
There was no television, there was no internet. If a man wanted to look at a naked woman and he didn't have a naked woman waiting for him at home, he could go to an art gallery and look at paintings of naked women. It's not surprising that the suffragettes got infuriated by this objectification of the naked woman, this deification of naked women in art galleries, whilst ignoring the realities and the real privations of women there in front of them in real life.
On March the 10th, 1914, the day after her leader Emmeline Pankhurst had been arrested in Glasgow, a former art student and militant suffragette, Mary Richardson, decided it was time to strike another blow for the cause.
She sort of plots her campaign very carefully. She decides to go into the National Gallery on one of the free days when there'll be lots of people around to witness her performing the act. She goes to the room and there are policemen seated in front of the Rokeby Venus.
What she had concealed about her person was some form of meat cleaver.
And she pretends to sort of sketch in a notebook, goes away to another gallery, come back, and she seizes her opportunity.
She went up to the Rokeby Venus,
takes the axe out of her bag, smashes the glass,
and she slashed at it with the cleaver.
7 times. It's really quite a sort of violent, quite a shocking act. Before people pounce upon her.
The guards were kind of racing around. Some of them slipped over, and by the time she was finally arrested, quite a lot of damage had been done to the painting. The attack on the Rokeby Venus got into all the newspapers, and the newspapers soon dubbed her Mary Slasher Richardson.
Her justification of it was that she wanted to attack this picture which everyone was admiring. All this fuss about a fictitious and unreal woman, whereas a real woman in our history who's making a real meaning from impact. Emmeline Pankhurst is in prison and she's suffering.
After Mary Richardson was sentenced to 6 months in Holloway Prison, the National Gallery set to work repairing the damaged canvas. Even today, more than 100 years later, it remains a painting which divides opinion.
What is the power of the Rokeby Venus? I think the power is in what we don't see, what is left to the viewer's imagination. So again, this is a definition of a great artist here. Velázquez doesn't show us everything.
The Rokeby Venus remains a very controversial painting. Artists love it, particularly artists who paint and study the nude. It's a wonderful exercise in nude painting.
This voluptuous, simple-looking painting of a naked woman is a much, much cleverer picture than it first appears. I think it's not just a testament to Velázquez's talent and ambition, but above all, to his honesty. This is a painter who is prepared to portray gormless monarchs and vicious popes as they really were. And similarly, when he turns his attention to lust, he goes the extra mile. So yes, he has stripped Venus absolutely naked, but look at her face. Look at that expression of cold, withering contempt as she stares back at the male viewer. He has also stripped naked the male gaze, the voyeurism, the lust. I wonder if the patrons who bought this picture and enjoyed it in private even noticed. That is smart. That is painting.
Next time,
this colossal gallery doesn't just contain the most important painting in Dutch history, it was actually built around it.
There are exhilarating highs.
Rembrandt in those days was really like a superstar.
And crippling lows.
In spite of the fame Rembrandt achieved, he was buried in a pauper's grave.
Of Rembrandt's iconic Night Watch.